Happy Halloween everybody, and welcome back to a brand new video from me, Pickles Park Reviews. Now, I have just finished watching Doctor Who The Halloween Apocalypse, the first episode of Series 13, or as it's now known, Doctor Who FLUX. It even said it in the opening titles, and I'm very happy to say that I came out of that episode feeling quite positive. I think this episode really told us quite a lot about the series, while not really being a story in its own right, because theorising about this whole 6 episodes, one big story told over multiple episodes, I speculated in my preview video about to what extent that would really entail. Would it be more so like other Doctor Who attempts at this kind of storytelling, like in the classic series you had The Key to Time, where it's still sort of operates as a traditional Doctor Who series. You know, the episodes are still standalone, just there's slight connective tissue between the episodes. Or is it going to be more in the vein of a Netflix series where each episode very much flows into one another, to the point where the episodes aren't really standalone entities? You know, they all sort of flow into one another. They're just mere little jigsaw pieces of a wider puzzle, rather than, you know, puzzles in their own right, if that makes sense. Very much like chapters are within a book. And I was speculating as to whether this would be something in the vein of something like a Netflix series or more modern television, or it would be very much sticking to Doctor Who's roots, just with more interconnected tissue than we typically get. And one aspect of this episode that obviously told us quite a lot about how the series is going to play out is that it's going to be more of a modern Netflix series. It's going to be one big story, and each episode is merely, as they say in the opening credits, a chapter of a wider book, if that makes sense. So, yeah, it's very much going to be like a mini-series, like what Netflix produces. Like, for example, Squid Game, which I watched recently, and I imagine most of you all did too. Obviously, there are certain episodes that you can pinpoint and say, yeah, that's where that happened. Like, you've got the Marble episode, you've got episode 2, which is the one where they're mostly outside of the game, obviously involving the whole voting process, not to spoil anything for those who may not have seen it. But obviously, even though there are certain episodes which different things happen, it's very much still one story. You get that with all Netflix series and practically all series in general, and obviously that seems to be what this Doctor Who series is going to be about. I was very unsure if that is what we would be getting, but yes, this is what we're getting, and this is very firmly something that we've never seen in Doctor Who. You could perhaps say that this is akin to a classic serial, you know, the classic series stories that could be told over, you know, 6, 7, 8, even 10 parts. Which, yes, if you were to compare this to anything in Doctor Who's history, it would be that. But even so, this is very much more playing itself out as a series, rather than those stories, because those stories still seemed relatively contained, just told over multiple parts. But this is very much, you've got loads of different storylines here, like you get in typical series, and you're just throwing them all in, and they're all going to be told over the course of this series. You've got lots of different storylines here, and it felt very epic. This is clearly a very epic story that Chibnall wants to tell. All these different storylines involving all these different characters and monsters in different places and scenarios, all brought together somehow, we don't know how, but all brought together due to the flux, and that was particularly interesting, and I will be interested to see how that plays out in future episodes. So yes, that is what we're getting. I was obviously speculating as to whether we would be getting this or not, and we are getting that, which is interesting because I think this really makes this stand out as something new. I was watching this and my parents felt the same, as it felt different to the other episodes of Jodie's run. It was very fast paced, lots of stuff was going on, and to me it felt very fresh and new, rather than just watching something and thinking, this just sort of feels like more of what we've had. You know, I think whether this was a conscious decision or not, Chris Chibnall thought that perhaps this series is getting a bit stale, let's spice it up, and he certainly did that. This felt like nothing that we've seen in Jodie's run, and to me it felt very much like the first part of a 2 or 3 part finale, you know, very much like all these different things are happening, even down to the cliffhanger. The universe is ending, all these different characters are in peril, and how's the Doctor going to get out of this one? It reminded me of the cliffhanger of the Pandora Opens, which for those who do not know is my favourite Doctor Who story paired with the Big Bang. So yeah, it all felt very epic, but I've sort of gone into the deep end here and gone to the ending, and obviously this is an initial reaction, so it's all going to be a bit scatterbrained. There's not going to be any order to this video, but yes, I jumped straight to the end. But that's because I wanted to speak about the cliffhanger, because it very much goes into the feel of this episode. This epic event that's bringing all these different strands together, all these different characters. And that's very much what this episode felt like. It was very much, here are these different, you know, characters, these different storylines that you're seeing, these different events that don't all come together as of yet, and obviously they're not supposed to. This episode is leaving, you know, potential strands all over the place. That's practically what it is. It's strands and different storylines that will be paid off later to engage you and get you to continue watching. It doesn't have one cliffhanger, it has several. Chris Chibnall is leaving several enigma codes, is what they're called, you know, to engage you and get you to tune in next week. It just occurred to me that I've never watched a series of Doctor Who live, because obviously one hadn't been broadcast, since I started studying media at sixth form, and now I know all the terminology. I just realised that I'm going to start analysing this a bit more severely than perhaps I did in my Series 12 videos, but there you go, I always slipped enigma codes into there. But yes, there's different strands that are obviously going to be paid off, and that's what this episode consists of, all these different storylines. It not only introduces Dan, but it introduces obviously what the Flux is, our different players here. We've got Vinda appears briefly, you've got the Swarm, that skull looking guy, the Carvanista, the Doctor and Yaz. You've also got the Weeping Angels and the Sontarans, this woman who seemingly met the Doctor, but the Doctor hasn't met her yet. Was it Sister? I couldn't quite hear, because the sound mixing for this episode, I'm going to be real, wasn't always the best. It was sometimes hard to hear what the characters were actually saying, because the music and the background noise and the non-diegetic sound was all quite loud. So yeah, ultimately sound mixing wasn't always great. It reminded me sometimes of a Christopher Nolan film. I remember when I went to see Tenet in the cinema, sound mixing, terrible, sort of reminded me of that. But yeah, we've got all these different storylines here, and one thing I will say, this episode is incredibly fast paced, which is great, because I think sometimes Chris Chibnall stories have a tendency to just sort of slow down and get kind of boring. You've got all this anticipation, it'll just slow down and say, here's a character beat. This didn't do that. One thing I actually quite liked is that it was all very fast paced. Even the Doctor and Yaz conversations back and forth was all in the midst of the action. It never quite slowed down, which I thought was great. One thing I will say, Doctor and Yaz, massive improvement here. I really liked the portrayal of the Doctor and Yaz in this story. Let's talk about Jodie Whittaker's Doctor, because she's certainly someone that I've been, you know, a bit critical of. The characterization, sometimes the performance, but I thought she was really good here. One thing I said in my preview was that ultimately I wanted there to be more mystery to this Doctor. I wanted her to appear darker, and we got that from Jodie Whittaker. She had her usual quips, you know, which is her thing, I suppose, but we also had those darker moments, particularly in the form of her wanting to find Carvanista because she wants information on the division. She wouldn't tell Yaz about that, and I like the fact she's keeping secrets from Yaz, that, you know, there's almost that distance in their relationship. We even had her, you know, snap at Yaz and say, I've shown you these amazing places, you know, so essentially shut up and stop questioning me. I thought that was really interesting, and I thought their relationship was really interesting as well, and it's very much developed off screen between Revolution of the Daleks and this, but it's culminated in a much more interesting relationship. Two people who have travelled together quite a lot, who understand each other on a level, but also Yaz understands the Doctor so well that she knows when the Doctor is hiding something from her. It's a more detailed relationship than before, which is great, because one of the things I was worried about with the Doctor and Yaz is I really didn't think they had that much of a relationship. Jodie Whittaker and Mandip Gill, whatever they do off camera, on camera, they didn't appear to have all that much chemistry, and Yaz wasn't a very interesting character, so I wasn't quite sure how that was going to work. it certainly does here. I think it's because Chris Chibnall has changed their relationship. Yaz is a much more experienced companion who seems much more confident in herself, knows, you know, all about this stuff, but she also has the time to breathe and be her own character now that it's just only her and the Doctor. And even though we're bringing Dan in, Yaz plays a different role now. She wasn't just on the same level as Ryan and Graham, in which she was new companion, very inexperienced. Now she's very much playing a different role to our other companion, rather than playing the same as the other two. She is the more experienced companion, and you've got Dan, who was the newbie, shall we say. And yeah, I think that works for a TARDIS trio. You need characters fulfilling different functions, and I think they've really elevated Yaz into that sort of character, and I really enjoyed her in this episode. I thought her dynamic bouncing off the Doctor was not only fun, but also allowed us to go into not only her frustrations, but the Doctor's darker character. She is willing to withhold information from her friends and to do things that she doesn't want to tell people about, to go on her own agenda, which is great. Jodie's Doctor, we saw her a bit unsure in certain moments. As I said, she was cracking her usual jokes, but she also seems a lot more panicked and a lot more serious in parts. She very much had more layers to her performance than we typically see, and I think that was because that was serviced by the writing. Chris Chibnall's writing, he's really underwritten her, I think, in a lot of stories, not in this one. And I think if all these elements continue, I think Jodie Whittaker's Doctor is going to be the best she's ever been in this run of episodes, purely because she's actually being given something to do. She's being affected by the plot now, rather than just being someone passive in it. And that's certainly great. Yeah, and I think the fast-pacedness of this story very much lended to Jodie's Doctor and Yaz's relationship, because I think with Jodie's Doctor, sometimes if you slow down with her Doctor, she very much becomes quite irritating and very insubstantial. She's just cracking jokes and making references to just nonsense, which we do get here, but I'll speak about why I didn't mind that. But no, you usually get that, but I thought even some of her quips were quite funny, because it's all fast-paced in the moment of the action. I quite liked Yaz's joke about, you said we were going to speak to a man about a dog, but it turns out the man is a dog. I thought that was quite funny, and it's very rare that I actually laugh at Chibnall humour, but I thought because it was fast-paced and worked into the story, it all came across well. Jodie's quips and the jokes in the episode in general don't slow down and say laugh. That, you know, they were all in the thick of the action, and they all came across quite well. And I think when you dwell on Jodie's Doctor perhaps too much, she can become a bit irritating. But here it was very fast paced, so I think she works a lot better in this kind of story. And yeah, in terms of this story, as I said, it's very epic, and I liked the fact that we were hopping from different places. That may annoy some people, the fact that we don't really have a clear direction of where we're going. We're just sort of hopping from one place to another. We've clearly got our story here, in which you've got the Doctor and Yaz following the Carvanista. The Carvanista comes to Earth, takes Dan. The Doctor is tracking the Carvanista, goes to rescue Dan onto the ship, and the Carvanista explains why he kidnapped Dan, and obviously the Flux. That's our main crux. We also have the storyline with, I think it's Joseph Williamson? I could be wrong. The old guy in sort of Victorian Liverpool, the kind of tunnel guy, who I know is a real historical figure, who made some sort of tunnels where there was no real reason as to why he was doing it. I presume we're going to get a Doctor Who explanation for that in a future episode, but we had him. We obviously had Dan's, I wouldn't say girlfriend, but friend. It seems as if they are hinting at perhaps maybe more of a romantic thing, perhaps, that potentially, you know, lurking there. But his love interest, I'll just call her that. We had her storyline, we had the stuff in Norway, we had the Skull guy, the Swarm, and his sister, I think. I still could be wrong in that, but I think he said sister. And their storyline as well. We have Linda's, we have the Woman and the Weeping Angel, which again felt very disconnected, but I'm sure that will come together in future episodes. And we just had the Sontaran storyline as well. So even though we are following the Doctor, we have those additional storylines as well. We're hopping from different places, so the story always feels quite fast paced, And yeah, I also liked the mystery and intrigue with the Doctor story. We don't know why she's going after the Carvanista originally. It's obviously revealed it's because of the division, which is interesting. I had a feeling they would bring that back, the stuff to do with the Timeless Children and the Timeless Child and that revelation. And the Roof Doctor, she's probably going to appear in this series, actually. I think the mention of the division implies that she is going to appear at some point. But yeah, we obviously got that coming back, but we don't need to worry about that too much because we've got the Flux now, and that's just merely another thing that's almost, let's put a pin in that thought and we'll come back to that later, sort of thing. But yes, we've got those stories, and also there's the intrigue about the Tardis, what's going on with that. I thought that was quite clever, the different doors popping up. I particularly liked the sort of doors coming out of the floor. I thought that was quite a unique visual, and again it added more peril into this, more intrigue as well. And yeah, let's talk about Dan then, because he's the new companion in this story. Yeah, I like him. I like John Bishop. We don't get an immense amount of character, but we understand that he's, you know, perhaps not financially well off, but he seems to be certainly someone who cares about people. He seems to be working at the local food bank, giving out sweets to kids, despite the fact he doesn't seem to have that much food himself. So that shows that he clearly puts others before himself, even in situations that, you know, maybe he should be putting himself first. But, you know, clearly he's someone who's selfless to the ultimate degree. He's someone who's passionate about history, which would be certainly interesting in, you know, the historical stories. It's nice to have a companion who's passionate about history again. It very much reminds me of Barbara from obviously the OG TARDIS lineup in 1963. But yeah, so he'll be interesting in those stories. He's passionate about the city, he's passionate about Liverpool, the city, and he's also passionate about Liverpool Football Club. A minor little thing there, but for those who don't know, I support Liverpool myself, so it was particularly interesting because I've been to Liverpool, the city, when I've watched Liverpool, and it was very interesting to see them filming stuff in Liverpool, places that I've actually been to. That was quite cool as well, like their Museum of Liverpool, I've been to that, and also Anfield as well, which for those who don't know is Liverpool Stadium, in which Dan's house is literally next to Anfield. Which is really cool because I've been there. I probably walked down that street, which was really cool as well. It was also really weird to see the Doctor randomly reference Liverpool and speak about Klopp and Trent Alexander-Arnold. That was quite odd, because it was a quite weird and out there, but as I'm a Liverpool fan, quite a nice reference. Although one thing that I did think of is that's really going to date this episode. It's like if David Tennant randomly referenced Rafa Benitez and Fernando Torres. That would just be so dated because it's not 2008 anymore. But yeah, it was an odd reference, but as a Liverpool fan, it was just nice to see all the different references to there. And having been to Liverpool a few times, as I said, I've been to Anfield, I've been around Liverpool. You know, it was just quite nice to see, and quite odd to see them in all these locations in which I've actually been to. That was quite odd. But yeah, Dan, in terms of his character, we don't get all that much, but we get that he's selfless and he, you know, likes history. And obviously John Bishop, being the comedian that he is, has some quite funny scenes. I already like his delivery. I already like the energy he brings to the role, and yeah, I think he's going to be a great addition to the TARDIS team. And other than that, there's not an amazing amount to say, other than say, ooh, look at all these plot threads that we got. It was interesting to see how a new director and a new composer would do the whole Weeping Angel thing. It was, the music wasn't quite as effective as the, you know, iconic Murray Gold stuff, but I did like some of the direction. It was different, it was interesting. They were using more like panning from the bottom upwards to shoot to the Weeping Angel. I thought that was a really unique idea. I quite liked the usage of the scenario, the trying to open your door but you can't look. I thought that was all, you know, quite nice, and I'm very glad to see the Weeping Angels back. Speaking of, this episode was a supposed Halloween episode, and it was very much like the New Year's specials, in which, you know, New Year's is really only just sort of mentioned and it's not an integral part of the story. Same for Halloween, but one thing that I thought was really quite creepy actually, I imagine if I was a kid I would have pissed my pants probably, was when Dan's love interest, Diane I think it is approached with that big house, and it's almost cut and shot like a horror movie, almost when she's ushered in and then the door slams shut very quickly. It was all shot and cut like a horror movie, which is great because I spoke about how I want some fear factor to come back to Doctor Who. Yeah, that did come back to this. I like the fact that this episode brings a lot of peril back. It makes the story feel huge, it makes the threat feel huge, but it also has a lot of intrigue as well. We know virtually nothing about the scenario, but it's setting up all these plot threads. It's a very fast-paced episode, and yeah, I'm really interested to see where this all goes. I think Jodie was great, I thought Yaz was very much improved, I thought Dan was interesting, I like all the plot threads, I really liked having the Sontarans back as well. Obviously they've gone back to the more classic design, but also their voices sound more like the classic series. That Sontaran on the hologram, his voice sounded like a classic Sontaran, so that was quite cool. Yeah, you've got all these different things. Obviously, what is the Swarm about? You know, what's his deal? He knows the Doctor, but the Doctor doesn't know her. Equally with the woman, she knows the Doctor doesn't know her. We're going to get some time bending stuff as well. But one thing that I am glad about, and I said it in my preview, I wanted Chibnall to do big ideas, big out there interesting ideas. He hasn't done that enough. He did it in this episode. He did. The flux seems really interesting, inverting all that sort of stuff with the planets. That seems cool. We've obviously got the time stuff with the Weeping Angels and that woman, the history with the Doctor, all these time zones coming into place. Yeah, it was really interesting actually. It's setting up a really cool story, and as I said, it feels like the first part of a finale, which is only a compliment because it feels as if this story is going in some interesting places. Yeah, it was fast-paced, urgent, interesting storylines, interesting characters. Yeah, and I'm so glad to have Doctor Who back, to be honest. Because I've said it before, I wasn't all that hyped for this series of Doctor Who. I wasn't all that hyped before going into Series 12, but when I watched the first episode of Series 12, my hype returned, and it's the same here. It just reminded me of why I like Doctor Who, and yeah, everything in here was improved. Everything that we got in Series 12 is improved now. I think this sort of fast-paced storytelling really suits Jodie Whittaker's Doctor more than your slower, more traditional Doctor Who stories. And yeah, I thought it was really cool. You've got the interesting new ideas, you've got the returning threats, you've got the universe, ending shenanigans going on there. Yeah, it just sets up some really interesting stuff, and although you can't really judge this episode in its own right, this episode will be judged on all these storylines. Will they get resolved, and how satisfyingly will they get resolved? Obviously that's what this episode is going to be judged on. But speaking about it right now, I can only talk about all of the threads that have been opened up, and very much the feel of this episode, because we don't get any concrete answers in this episode other than what's the rest of the series going to be like, really. So you can only really speak about that and the atmosphere of what this episode and what it gives us and what it indicates for the rest of the series. And speaking about that, I am very excited because it looks like we're going to get a very fast-paced, interesting series of Doctor Who. I was skeptical of this one story told over 6 episodes. I was unsure if it really is Doctor Who in its truest sense, but no, I think they've pulled it off, and as I said, I think it really suits Chris Chibnall and this Doctor. I really do. I really enjoyed this episode. As I said, it doesn't have that substance, okay, it's not a story in its own right, but speaking about all the threads that it sets up, what it indicates for the rest of this series, the returning villains, the different enigma codes and different plot threads and all these ideas and potential questions that we're going to get answers for. Yeah, I thought it was really good, honestly. I really enjoyed it. And as I said, this episode is only going to be as good as the resolutions these plot threads get. But right now, having only watched the first episode, yeah, I thought it was very interesting. And yeah, I'm very excited to see where the rest of the series goes. It's just great to have Doctor Who on our screens, isn't it? Yeah, it's just great to have Doctor Who back. And yeah, I'm very excited for the rest of the series. So yeah, that is my thoughts. That's my initial reaction to Doctor Who The Halloween Apocalypse, recorded straight after I finished watching the episode, so I haven't seen anyone else's reactions. Otherwise I would have checked certain things like, is the Skull Woman the Swarm's sister, or is it another relation? I would have checked that, but I wanted to do this straight after watching the episode so I don't, get influenced by other people's opinions. I haven't checked Twitter or anything like that, or anyone else's videos. For all I know, honestly, people might really hate this episode, but I really enjoyed it, yeah, and I'm very interested to see where this story goes. It was very fast-paced, very intriguing, and an absolute return to form for Doctor Who, in my opinion. Yeah, thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and drop a sub. If you want to see more Doctor Who content from me, I'm going to be doing initial reactions for every single Doctor Who episode as part of Doctor Who FLUX. Every single weekend I will be putting out my initial reaction. So yes, stay tuned for that if you would like. I'm not sure if this is coming out tonight at maybe 10 o'clock or something, if I manage to get out by that time, or if it actually comes out tomorrow morning on Monday. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, around that time, either Monday morning or Sunday evening, I'll always have my episode reactions out. So yeah, stay tuned for that if you're interested. And yeah, more Doctor Who content on the way. What did you think of the first chapter of Doctor Who FLUX? Did you like it? Did you not? As I said, recording this, I don't know what the general consensus is on it. All I know is I enjoyed this episode. But yeah, whatever you think, drop your thoughts in the comment section below. I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts. But yes, thank you guys all for watching, for listening to my initial reaction. Happy Halloween, and of course, a goodbye.